Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 56 of the Resilient Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Aurelius, and today's episode is going to be pretty personal to me. It's going to be pretty personal because of the fact that it is still Mental Health Awareness Month. And, folks, it's crazy because when this month started, of course, episode 55, I had Nicole Figueroa as my third guest of the year on the Resilient Podcast. And we talked about mental health. But I wanted to dedicate one episode to myself this month. And that's mainly for two reasons. Because number one, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's my favorite cause of the year. And number two, this is going to be my last episode in my 30s. What does that mean? That means that I am a 39-year-old man, and this coming Tuesday, I am going to be 40 years old. I'm going to be moving on to a new chapter in my life, a new phase, if you want to call it that. But I'm going to be entering a new era in my life. I'm going to be entering a time in my life where I spent a lot of time very, very spooked about this. I remember when I was in my 20s, I thought about, oh my God, what is it going to be like when I'm in my 40s? Am I going to be alive? Am I going to be around? Am I going to be married? Am I going to have kids? And, it's fair to say that I'm entering my 40s with no children, no wife. I still don't have like this dream home that I've always wanted. I don't even have the dream car that I've always dreamed of. But I remember in my 30s, or at least when I turned 30, I did a photo shoot with my friend Jabbar. And Jab, as most of you may know, is one of the people that helped me with this documentary, the Resilience documentary, which, by the way, I will be discussing with you all in the near future the date that this documentary is coming out. But Jab was one of the people that helped me create the Resilience jacket. The jacket that I wear, the Resilience T-shirts that you guys wear, and even though Jab and Blue from For Your Wear have worked together to help the Resilient Podcast with their efforts and all of that. Jab is back in the day, and he still is phenomenal photographer. And he did my 30th photo shoot, my 30th year photo shoot. And it was a great photo shoot. We did a very nice video. And if you guys actually look at my social media, I mean, it's pretty deep. Um, I did a video when I turned 30. It was a very nice video. And here's the funny thing, like, I didn't have this beard that I have now. It wasn't as it was a little patchy, and it really wasn't anything. It was very light. It was very light beard. But I was also overweight. I wasn't in the best shape. And I remember that when I made this video, I said that I was, I remember saying I made it to 30, and I thought I was exactly where I needed to be in life. And then it took my 30s to realize that I wasn't exactly anywhere near where I wanted to be in my life. And now that I'm entering my 40s, first I'm entering the 40th year, and then, 41, 42 next year, blah, blah, blah. But now that I'm entering my 40s, I have been more resilient. I have been more thoughtful, more mindful, more passionate about it, everything. And I'm not going to let entering my 40s like a big deal. I'm not going to let it phase me. I'm not going to let it like haunt me. I'm not going to let it like terrorize me, because there's people that would say things like, "Oh, when I enter this year, I'm like terrified." And this particular episode, I'm not going to talk too much about like my age per se. This is why I'm talking about it now, because this episode is actually going to be very interesting. The reason why this episode is going to be interesting is because a few weeks ago, this was like actually April, um, I went to go see the Michael Jackson movie. And I'm not sure how many people that watch this podcast have actually gone to see it. People that have not gone to see it yet. But I went to go see the Michael Jackson movie because, as you may know, for the most part, those that know me very well know that I'm a big Michael Jackson supporter. I love Michael Jackson. I've always loved Michael Jackson's music. Um, I've always loved Michael Jackson's messages. It's mainly his messages. The music is one thing. The music is, everybody that knows Michael Jackson knows him for his music and his dancing. But of course, the dancing moved me. The dancing has always like kept me mesmerized. But it's Michael's music that's always been the most effective for me, and Michael's message to the world. You know, this year will be 17 years since Michael passed away. But I don't think, there's so many great people out there that preach so much to us, and tell us so many beautiful things and encourage us with such beautiful words. But, for me, it's Michael Jackson that has always made some of the best. He's created some of the best messages ever. And till this day, Michael's words resonate with me. Michael's words always will impact me. And it's fair to say as well that I kind of know what Michael went through as a child, because I know what it feels like to have your childhood robbed. I know what it feels like to be raised in a household where people just expected you to be something. I know what it feels like to be neglected and not be loved and not feel loved. And it's one of the reasons why this podcast today exists, the Resilient Podcast, because, folks, I'm not gonna, I've been very vocal about it, and I've been very vocal about it even prior to my podcast being created. But I've been very vocal for the last few years, but I've informed people about the fact that most people have always looked at me and said, "Oh, look at that guy, Rob Aurelius. He's got such a beautiful life ahead of him. He's got such a beautiful support system. It seems like that guy could not go through. He's probably never went through anything wrong in his life." And the fact of the matter is, folks, that I've been through a lot. The podcast alone was created because of an experience that I endured, where I was with someone who I wanted to marry, um, and it didn't work out. And this person, my ex girlfriend, APA, was also a big fan of Michael Jackson. And her favorite song was Earth Song by Michael. And Earth Song is one of my favorite songs too. But, just to put it out there, um, my favorite song of all time from Michael Jackson is Billie Jean. But most importantly, it's like a 50-50, because it's Billie Jean and it's A Man in the Mirror. And of course, I like Smooth Criminal, Beat It. There's so many songs. that I love about Michael Jackson. But like I said before, Michael Jackson's message to the world, like I always ask people, what is your message to the world? Imagine if I was able to ask Michael Jackson, if he was still alive, Michael, what is your message to the world? Just imagine his response. But folks, I can't talk about Michael Jackson without addressing the elephant in the room. And I do know that unfortunately Michael Jackson during his career also had some he had a lot of controversy, and one of them was the allegations. And I feel that it's not fair to talk about Michael Jackson without addressing the allegations, because I don't know who could be listening, I don't know who could be watching this episode, and I don't know if they can actually be somebody that actually supports Michael Jackson, and I don't want to offend anyone. So with that in mind, I do want to say that I've always acknowledged the allegations towards him, and even the allegations that are being made today about him. Because the movie came out. And all I can say is, as a supporter, I want to believe that 99% of these allegations towards him are completely false. I want to feel that maybe because of who he was and what he wanted to do, he was someone who felt like he was a messenger from God to deliver the word of the Lord to us, that he was set up and that he was framed. And the reason why I'm saying this is because over the last few years, we've been able to find out that a lot of these allegations that were made towards Michael were not true. They were fabricated. They were not accurate. There's people that once said that Michael never did anything to them, and then eventually retracted their statements and went ahead to say, no, he actually did something to me. And I've always heard the stories about, sometimes it's very hard to speak out on your abuser. It's very hard to speak out on somebody that tormented you, hurt you, or whatever. And I'm like, here's the thing. If these people had the opportunity to accuse him of something that he actually did, you should be able to accuse him fully and say everything that happened, and not have the feeling of wanting to retract your statements or go back or change something that you said. I mean, I know it's not easy sometimes for folks to confess something. It's not easy for folks to speak on something that happened to them. But my thing is the fact that it's taken so many years for people to come out of nowhere and say the things that they said and make the allegations that they made. It's just very difficult. It's very, very difficult, and all I want to say is I want to hope deeply in my heart that any of these allegations that have been made towards Michael Jackson prior to his death, I hope that they're completely false. I'm not going to be one of those people that says, oh, well, the man was a great singer, so let's remember him for singing. I mean, look, if the man did bad things, because again, nobody's perfect, he has to be held accountable, and I'm willing to hold him accountable. But if the man never really did anything aside from just, thinking that it was okay to have kids sleep in his house, because I believe that that's what mainly got him in trouble, was the fact that he felt that kids could sleep in his house. If he never did anything, then great, but I've talked a lot about Michael Jackson in the first 10 minutes plus of this episode, but I want to talk to you guys about, in that topic, I believe that Michael and I both share in common something that a lot of people endure. And this happens so much to men just as much as it happens to women. And it's something called arrested development. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this episode. And, I want to say that in relation to that, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to grow up. Not just physically, not just in age, but emotionally. Because there's a difference between becoming older and actually becoming whole. So as I mentioned before, this coming Tuesday, I turned 40 years old. And I thought that would feel different, I thought that it would feel like arrival or like clarity, like everything I've been through would have finally made sense in a clean, organized way. But the fact of the matter is that instead it feels like reflection. And reflection doesn't always come with answers, right? We've talked about that before in the past episodes. Um, but sometimes it comes with questions you thought you already outgrew. And I've been on a long journey these last, couple of years through heartbreak, through rebuilding myself, through trying to understand who I am outside of loss, outside of attachment, and outside of pain. And what I've realized is that some parts of me didn't grow at the same pace as my age. And it's not because I didn't want them to, but because life doesn't always give you the environment to grow certain parts of yourself fully. There's a there are emotional spaces in me that still feel that like they're just catching up. And I didn't always have the language for that until recently. So, I mentioned that I went to go see the Michael Jackson movie. And when I went to go see the Michael film, I didn't expect it to affect me the way it did. And the reason for that is because it wasn't about comparing lives, it was about something deeper, recognizing emotional patterns. The idea of what happens when childhood is shaped under pressure, expectation, and intensity instead of safety, exploration, and even freedom. And, it triggered something in me that I've been sitting with ever since. Not because my life is the same as his, but because certain emotional echoes feel familiar in a way that's hard to ignore. And that's what this episode is about. It's not about comparison, but awareness. And like I mentioned to you all before, this episode is called Arrested Development. So I had this conversation with a friend of mine who came into town recently. And, we were doing pre-birthday festivities for me. And, we talked about Arrested Development. So, one of the things that we discussed was we talked about the podcast, we talked about everything that's been going on in my life. And we had a very beautiful discussion, open dialogue about a lot of things. And one of the things I talked about is like, what does arrested development mean to me personally, right? So to me, you know, let me be clear about something, okay? When I say arrested development, I'm not talking about a diagnosis. I'm talking about a concept, okay? A pause in emotional growth that happens when life experiences, especially early ones, don't give you the space to fully develop certain parts of yourself. And sometimes you don't realize it until later in life when something triggers it, right? So for me, I've noticed it most in how I process loss, how I process attachment, how I respond to emotional change, and how certain moments in adulthood can feel bigger than they should Because, there are times where I don't respond from who I am now. I respond from a younger version of me that never fully processed certain things. And I think a lot of people live like that without realizing it. We just call it personality. We call it being sensitive. We call it overthinking. But sometimes it's deeper than that. Sometimes it's development that was interrupted, delayed, or shaped under pressure instead of safety. So, this episode alone makes me realize so much about life. And, folks, I look forward to bringing in these 40s. I really do. And I'm not ashamed of where I am. I know that I could be in a better place. I know I could be doing better, but I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed that I'm not a father. I'm not ashamed that I'm not a husband yet. I'm not ashamed of what I haven't accomplished. I'm just looking at it like, hey, you're not there yet, but this is the time for you to get there. So, we're going to take a quick break. And before we do, I want to take a moment to shout out one of our sponsors, which is Maddie Rocks Coffee. If you've been following the journey on this podcast, you know how important moments of stillness and reflection are for me. And for a lot of those moments, it starts with a cup of coffee that actually feels intentional, not just routine. So Maddie Rocks Coffee is exactly that. It's built for people who are doing the inner work, the early mornings, the late nights, the conversations with yourself that most people don't even hear about. So whether you're journaling, working, or just trying to slow your thoughts down for a minute, this is the kind of coffee that meets you in that space. So please, folks, go support Maddie Rocks Coffee and fill your mornings with intention. Or if you work at night, or if you drink coffee like throughout the day. But by visiting this link right here on the screen, when you click on that link and it takes you to the website and you make a purchase with the code TRP10, you get 10% off your purchase. And this is an ongoing discount code. This is not a discount code that you only get once. This discount code will work for you every single time that you make a purchase. So the link is right here on the screen. If you're a coffee lover, cold brew, regular black coffee, coffee with milk, iced coffee, whatever the case may be, visit this website. 10% off your purchase just by listening or watching the Resilient Podcast. So, folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll continue to talk more about arrested development. So we'll be back soon. All right, folks. Welcome back to the Resilient Podcast, episode 56. I'm your host, Robert Aurelius. We are still celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month. And I just wanted to let you all know that I have decided to give you all 3 episodes this month. So we've already had episode 55, which was with, like I mentioned earlier, with Nicole, episode 56, which is this solo episode right now, and episode 57 before the end of the month, because it's such an important month for me. And, prior to the break, I was talking about, arrested development, and I mentioned my age to you guys. I mentioned that I'm turning 40 years old this Tuesday. And, turning 40 is interesting because it forces honesty, right? So, you can't really pretend you're still figuring things out in the same way you were at 25. And I've had this conversation with friends before. But, you also can't pretend you're fully finished either. So you end up in this space in between. And that space, I've had to ask myself uncomfortable questions. But, it's honest. And honesty is part of healing. So, you know, I literally was having this serious conversation with my friend. And, you know, one of the questions that I had asked myself was literally, why do certain emotional moments still hit me so deeply? Like things that happened to me in the past. And I've also asked myself, why do some losses feel like they echo longer than others? I've also asked myself, why do I sometimes feel like I'm catching up to myself emotionally? And I think part of the answer is that adulthood isn't just about time passing, it's about interrogation. It's about bringing all versions of yourself into alignment, even the versions you avoided, even the versions you didn't understand yet. So, when I went to see the Michael Jackson film, I didn't go in expecting anything personal. Regardless of how I already felt about Michael's legacy, his career, like his traumas and whatnot, I went in as an observer, right? But what I didn't expect was how much it would open me emotionally. Not because I see myself as him, but because it surfaced themes I've spent years trying to understand in my own way. Childhood pressure, identity formation, emotional isolation, the difference between being seen by the world and being understood as a person. And this is something that I've spoken to my therapist about since I've been in therapy. And, I left that theater that night not overwhelmed by his story, but aware of my own, aware of the parts of me that still process emotion in ways that were shaped a long time ago. And I think that's what triggers really are. They're not just reactions, they're reflections. They show you where something still lives inside of you that hasn't fully settled yet. So, one of the things I talked to my friend about, because, my friend was asking me, like, hey, where are you mentally with all of this? Like, it's been 2 years since you and your ex-girlfriend broke up, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's been 2 years. It's crazy. So, we talked about love, we talked about loss and emotional reaction patterns. And, when I look at my breakup from 2024, I don't just see a relationship ending, I see what it activated in me. Not in a blaming way, but in a reflective way. Loss doesn't just take something from you, it reveals what you were building your emotional stability on. And I had to sit with that because there were moments where I realized I wasn't only grieving the person, I was also confronting older emotional patterns that surfaced in that experience. And that's not easy to admit. It's not easy to admit. And, again, it's honesty. And honesty is part of healing, like I mentioned before. So when I was talking to my friend about this episode, I was like, we're going to talk about Arrested Development. My friend was like, what? I was like, Arrested Development. So my friend was like, what does Arrested Development mean to you personally? And I remember saying to him, it means, to me, it means, realizing that not every part of me developed at the same time. Some parts of me are very mature, disciplined, reflective, aware, but other parts still react emotionally in ways that feel younger than my age. Not immature, just unfinished in certain emotional experiences. And now I'm learning how to meet those parts instead of judging them. So, you know, in my therapy sessions, I talk a lot about my childhood because in order to confront the current situation of how I feel and these issues that I've had with abandonment, these issues that I've had with um you know breakups and whatnot, it's something that if it wasn't for therapy, I would not be able to acknowledge a lot of these things. I mean, I felt like prior to therapy, okay, I went, of course, we always know what we go through in life, right? We always know what we go through. We always know and remember for the most part, what we went through. I mean, sometimes we don't want to remember those things. Sometimes we don't want to think about those things, but it's things that sometimes they're just there. And sometimes you could just be living your best life, and out of nowhere, you get that sudden wave of sadness that just kicks in. And now you're like, whoa, what the hell? Why am I thinking about this? Why did this come to my mind? So, I've talked a lot about my childhood to my therapist. I've opened up about my childhood to my friends, even former partners in the past. I opened up about my childhood with my ex, you know, and my friend asked me that night, like, hey, do you feel like your childhood shaped this whole thing? Like, who Rob Aurelius is today and the Resilient podcast and everything. And I'm like, yeah. But I think that most people's childhood shape them in ways that they don't fully understand until adulthood. I don't look at it as blaming the past. I look at it as understanding the origin of emotional patterns. Because once you understand it, you stop repeating it unconsciously. So we were talking about the Michael movie, and I told him, like, yeah, I had some triggers, certain scenes. And he was like, okay, so why did the Michael Jackson film trigger you? And I told him, look, I felt it triggered me because it highlighted the idea of emotional development being shaped under pressure. And it made me reflect not on similarity of lives, but on similarity of emotional concepts like identity, pressure, and inner child development. And it wasn't about comparison, it was about awareness. So, you know, we were talking about my age and how, this big four turning the big 4-0 is such a big deal, right? Because it's a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm 40 years old, or I'm going to be 40 years old. So, my friend was like, okay, so when it comes to arrested development, how does turning 40 connect to all of this? And I said to him, well, turning 40 um made me realize that I need to slow down and reflect instead of just moving forward. It made me ask myself, am I just aging or am I actually integrating who I've become? And I think real growth is when you stop running from your internal questions and start sitting with them honestly. So, you know, we talked about the Michael movie. We talked about me turning 40. We talked about Arrested Development. But then my friend goes to me, here's the thing though, where does resilience fit in this conversation that we're having? And I said to him, resilience isn't pretending you're unaffected. Resilience is being honest about what still affects you and choosing not to let it define your future. It's not about being healed, it's about being aware and still moving forward. And my friend was like, okay, great. I love that. That sounds good. He was like, I'm glad that we're able to like be aware of what happened and like you said, just moving forward. So folks, this episode, I have been waiting for such a long time to have this episode. It's definitely a theme and it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, but I just didn't know when to actually have this episode. And I'm glad that I was able to, you know, have this episode with you all because, man, I'm telling you, um, if you really start to think about Arrested Development, you're gonna be like, oh my goodness, you know, especially those that can relate, especially those that didn't have a good childhood, especially those that came from toxic, homes and whatnot. Because a lot of people come from toxic toxic homes. And sometimes we don't really want to acknowledge it or even like talk about it until like, we become adults. And I'm just glad that I can talk about it so freely now. I'm so glad that I can, these were tough conversations to have. When I started talking to my therapist and started talking to her about like the abuse that was going on in my home, you know, being raised in a single parent home where I was being abused by my mom, I was being abused by my older siblings, verbally, mentally, emotionally, everything. Um, I'm just glad and I thank God for this every single day. I'm just glad that with all of that happened, I didn't go out there. I mean, I definitely had my time in my life where I was walking around with a chip on my shoulder. But for the most part, I wasn't going out there trying to hurt others. I wasn't trying out there trying to kill people or steal from banks or people's houses or, hurt women and break women's hearts or, hurt my friends. Like or hurt children. I'm glad that I did. The pain that I endured didn't end up being like that because one thing for certain, and I got to make this very clear, folks, is and I'm not trying to justify anything here, but this has a lot to do with the fact that I went to school for psychology. We need to understand something, and this is a very, very important subject. And I want you all to listen very clearly to this. Please understand that this being a sensitive topic right here, it's important to acknowledge the fact that most folks that are going around the world today, or even folks from the past, like some of these dictators, or these terrorists, suicide bombers, these criminals, most of these folks that have done very bad things, like these heinous acts, it's because it had a lot to do with their childhood. A lot of these people that have been murderers, rapers, criminals, a lot of these people just were not loved. They were not loved. And they weren't taught love. They were abandoned. And because they were abandoned, because they were treated bad, because they went through abuse, they grew up to be terrible people. And this is why I've always said to people like, folks, please take care of children, love children, give children all the love that you can. Don't abuse children because unfortunately, when children are abused, when children grow up with hate and toxicity and all these things, it's very hard for them to navigate in life like the way they should. You know, they're going to be traumatized. They're going to be hurt. They're going to be, for the most part, sometimes bitter, resentful. You know, and then you got to try to figure it out. Like me, like I grew up with so much resentment, so much bitterness, so much hate in my heart. And then it wasn't until maybe like before I got into college, I said to myself, oh no, I can't live my life like this. I can't be mad at everything. I can't be blaming everybody for everything. I got to acknowledge what happened to me and I got to embrace the past, but I got to live for today. And a lot of that has to do with resilience, being resilient, you know? So, folks, before we end this episode, which I hope served you all as a good episode, I want to give one more shout out um, to Victor Melgar out at Nala Health. So, recently Victor sent me over some care products from a care package that he sent me, and I'm thankful for that. And I've been going through the season of reflection, right? Especially with the fact that turning 40, um, it's made me think about healing and understanding emotional patterns. Health has always taken on a different meaning for me, not just physical health, but emotional and mental balance too. So with Victor and Nala Health, it represents that kind of holistic approach. And, I had a conversation with Victor, and he was talking to me about all these future things that are coming up very soon. And I was just so happy for him. And this is why I was so thankful when Victor accepted the offer to be one of the sponsors for the Resilient Podcast. And I've thought that the idea of taking care of yourself isn't one dimensional. It's layered. So I just want to thank Victor for supporting conversations like this, where we're not just talking about success or pain, but about total well being. So, with that being said, Victor, thank you for supporting us. Thank you for being part of the Resilient Podcast movement. And I look forward to the day that I actually could interview Victor on this podcast. But for the time being, folks, if you visit this website right here on your screen, nalahealth.com, go on the website, check out these products. He's got so much new products that just came in, some really good products that he just came out with. And again, by listening to the Resilient Podcast or by watching it here on YouTube, when you use the code TRP10, you save 10, you get a 10% discount just by tuning into the Resilient Podcast. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So go on out, check out his website, check out his CBD, check out his phytoceuticals, check out these beautiful formulas that he has, and knock yourself out. Have a blast. So, this episode is coming to an end, but before it does, I want to talk to you guys about how I used to think that growing up meant living certain parts of yourself behind. I literally thought that, growing up was all about that, like just leaving certain parts of yourself behind you, like put it in the past, put it in the rearview mirror. But I don't believe that anymore. I think that growing up is actually about integration. It's about taking every version of yourself, your younger self, your hurt self, your evolving self, and learning how to let them exist in the same person without conflict. And folks, I don't think that arrested development means you're stuck. It's about taking every version of yourself, your younger self, your hurt self, your evolving self, and learning how to let them exist in the same person without conflict. I don't think arrested development means you're stuck. I think it means you're aware now of what didn't fully develop, and you finally have the language to work with it. And maybe that's what this season of my life is really about. That's what this whole season of my life is going to be about, you know, not becoming someone new, but finally becoming whole. And I look forward to that. Folks, today in the cards of James, this is the message. Everyone you meet has something to teach you. Sorry, Oscar, my throat got dry, so I had to take that quick break. I'm very sorry. Um, but yes, in today's cards of James, the message is everyone you meet has something to teach you. And I believe in that. And I believe in people coming to your life for a season, a reason, a lifetime. Please understand that those folks that are meant to stay, they will stay forever and you will be happy about that. But some folks are not meant to chase, to be around in every chapter of your life, every aspect of your life. Make peace with that. Because the truth is, they're all here just to teach you something. Whether it's a bad thing, whether it's a good thing, or it's something that humbles you, whether it's something that makes you realize, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that type of person. I don't want to make the same mistakes that person made. But everything is a lesson. If it's a good lesson, thank God for it. Even if it's a bad lesson, thank God for that too, because you needed to learn that lesson. And if it's just a lesson that you just don't really understand yet, hopefully at some point you'll be able to understand what that lesson actually meant to you and what was the reason behind it. So remember that. So, folks, before I go, I just wanted to let you all know that also, please, when you get a moment, make sure that you sit down with yourself at some point in the next few days, possibly even today, and just reflect and think about your mental health. Think about if your mental health meter is good or if it's not. And if it's not, do some reflecting, do some journaling, reach out to me, talk to me, or if you feel comfortable talking to somebody else, please do that. Remember that you are not alone. Remember that, we're here to break the stigma. Don't listen to people that tell you that your your mental health is just a factor of you being weak, because it's not. Remember, you are loved. You have to love yourself as well too. And remember that you're worth it. You really are. So I want to thank you all for tuning into this episode today. And also, don't forget to check out the Resilience Tribune website. There's a new article coming out this month. It's going to be a very nice article. I promise you that. And, make sure to visit our shop, TRP shop, by clicking on the link right here. And folks, this is all I have for you all. The next time I do another episode, which will be episode 57, I will be a 40-year-old man, and I look forward to it. But it was such a pleasure to have this episode with you guys today. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you all. I look forward to episode 57. But for now, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening and watching this episode. I love you all from the bottom of my heart. And remember to always remain resilient. And I will see you all in the next episode. I love you all. God bless. Peace.